I would just love to get into the minds of the developers over at HAL Laboratories. I mean, how does a game go from this to this? Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now, I've been trying to work on my gaming backlog recently. Like everyone else, I'm sure, I've got a huge long list of games that I bought, never played, just never got round to, but I'm trying to change that. And so recently I decided to have another go at Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Before this, my only other Kirby game really was Planet Robobot, which I did like, but then when I tried to play Forgotten Land, I just kind of bounced off it the first time. I got a bit bored pretty early on into the game and ended up dropping it, but I decided I wanted to give it another chance. And I'm here to tell you that the longer you play this game, the better it gets. So the story of Forgotten Land really is pretty simple to follow. Kirby just seems to be minding his own business when a vortex opens up and it drags him and all the Waddle Dees into the Forgotten Land. Now in the Forgotten Land you can tell there must have been some kind of civilization at some point because there's all these ruined buildings, but apart from the beasts roaming the land there's nobody to be found, and very quickly you set off on an adventure to rescue all of the kidnapped Waddle Dees. Eventually you find out why there's nobody on the planet, you know, why the beasts are kidnapping the Waddle Dees, but really the story is not the main focus of the game. Gameplay is, however, and the core of this is Kirby making his way through various levels, trying to reach the end. The main objective is always to find the 3 Waddle Dees trapped at the end, but each level has its own various set of sub-objectives that you can try and figure out along the way, and of course there's enemies trying to stop him from reaching his goal. Kirby's signature inhale ability is back, but this time with an added twist. Mouthful mode lets you inhale inanimate objects, and these are a mix of inventive and hilarious. The first one that you see is the car, but it doesn't stop there, you know, and eventually you'll be absorbing traffic cones, vending machines, even at one point there's a circle you can absorb, and these all have their own different gameplay and abilities. So the car obviously it can boost and it can jump. The traffic cone, it can flip upside down and smash down onto things. The vending machine shoots cans of fizzy drink out at your enemies. They're all unique and they are all a good time. Even something as simple as Kirby absorbing a ring, it adds new gameplay elements where you can send out a puff of air and you can actually use that to power boats and change the direction that you're traveling on a boat. I like this mechanic a lot. Now sure, they could have chose a different name, but I think it fits in with the game really well and it works really well alongside Kirby's normal inhale abilities. It's very complementary to the Kirby gameplay that you've known from previous games. The level design is pretty great in this game as well. This is the first time that Kirby's gone properly 3D, similar to something like Mario Odyssey, and I think it does translate well across from 2D to 3D. The levels are mostly linear, unlike Mario Odyssey, but I do think they work well within this type of game. There's a lot of levels, but there are different sets of biomes. Some of them pretty basic, but they are still interesting. So for example, you've got like a desert biome, you've got an ice biome, a water biome. I actually think that I like the very first set of levels where you're sort of in this ruined, overgrown city. I think that was my favourite biome, and maybe the desert biome was the one that I found sort of the least interesting. It was a bit bland and generic. So that was a basic introduction to the game, but it's not really the reason that I wanted to make this video. The game's been out for a couple of years, so this isn't going to be a standard review. There's plenty of reviews out there at this point. I mentioned I was trying to work on my backlog, and I actually got this game on release, but like I said, I bounced off it pretty quickly, and I've realised from playing it again that I just didn't give this game enough of a chance to impress me. The game sort of changes as you play it, and as I said before, it gets better the longer you play it, and in this video I wanted to focus on why that is. So this starts with Kirby's basic inhale ability. As you make your way through levels, you inhale enemies that are trying to stop you. Now some of these don't do very much, you just inhale them, they turn into stars, which are projectiles that you shoot back out at enemies, but a fair number of them, when you inhale them, they are power-ups that you can absorb and then you gain benefits from, depending on which one it is that you absorbed. Now there's a whole range of these, all sorts of different sets. There's things like fire, ice, there's wind ones, there's bombs, there's a gun one you can have, and so on. There are really quite a lot of options in this game. The problem I had with it is that when you're first starting out, you're in those first few levels, these power-ups did seem a little bit boring to me. They're pretty basic, they don't have too much functionality. I knew you could upgrade these abilities when I first played, but I'd seen one or two of the upgraded versions and I didn't think they were that different, and I didn't quite realize just how in-depth this mechanic went and how much further it went than the other Kirby game that I'd played, which was Planet Robobot. As you complete levels, you unlock these side missions that, instead of acting as normal levels, they are these challenges that focus on using one specific power. And beating these is how you gain the currency that allows you to upgrade each of the different inhale and absorb abilities. Now, I initially made the mistake of not doing too many of these, and so most of my power-ups stayed at level 1 or 2 for quite a long time. I actually thought that level 2 was the highest level of power-up that you could actually get in the game. Now sure, level 2 is more interesting than the level 1 abilities, but only by a little bit, and I think this contributed to the reason why I sort of bounced off the game the first time, was that I didn't realise that you could take it even further. Upgrading these abilities even more does make it a lot more fun, and honestly some of the level 3 power-ups are actually really great, they're really good to play. Some of my favourites are the level 3 power-up for fire. It turns Kirby into like a dragon. It's got a great dragon breath attack, but it also has the ability to basically fly, or not quite as long as you would like, but you can use it in succession over and over, and so you can travel quite a long way on the map. I also really like Space Ranger Kirby, which is the upgrade for the level 3 gun. It's got a really good charge attack, it's got some dodging attacks like a jump attack, and not to mention I just think that this version of Kirby looks very cute and hilarious. And of course the Meta Knight Sword. The level 3 power up for the Meta Knight Sword feels so fast and fun to play as. The more of these optional side challenges that you do, the more of the power ups you can upgrade, and it really does open up the gameplay once you've got more and more abilities to level 3. Not to mention the challenge missions can actually act as ways of teaching you the best ways to use your power ups. So not all of the power ups use the same button inputs to activate various abilities, and the challenges really teach you how to use them best. So for example, the ice power up, I didn't realize for quite a long time that you could mash the B button to sort of, create this ice block around you, and that slides and damages enemies. I had no idea that you could do that until I just happened to go back and do the challenge mission where you have to do that. You have to slide down slopes, take out enemies on the way, and try and beat the time that it sets for you. And honestly, it's pretty fun, as well as teaching you how to play the game better. So that's the first way that the game becomes more fun the longer you play it. The abilities, powering them up and learning how to use them properly does make the game a lot more fun. The second way is the difficulty of the game. Forgotten Land has 2 difficulties, but even if you pick the harder one, which is called Wild Mode, if you're a seasoned gamer, especially at first, you're not really going to have any troubles with this game. You're not really in any proper danger in the entire time that you're playing on those first few biomes. Don't get me wrong, the visuals are still great, the game has a lot of charm to it, it's fun to see all the levels and all the ideas the developers had, but just in terms of that core difficulty, you're not really going to have too much of a problem with it. Now I know there are a lot of solid reasons behind this. Kirby's a family-friendly series, there's a lot of younger audiences that are sort of getting into video games through Kirby, so I completely understand why it is the way that it is. All I'm saying is that part of the reason why I think I initially dropped the game the first time is that there wasn't really any challenge to it, and that's how it starts anyway. The further along you play though, this does change, and compared to what I was expecting, the difficulty curve does seem to increase quite a bit. Now when I say the difficulty is harder, I don't necessarily mean all of a sudden the enemies have way more health and they just immediately do loads of damage, taking you down by half health in one shot. No, that's not what I mean. The level design changes in a way that adds new things, new challenges, and it makes the game more fun. The number of enemies in a level increases, there's new mechanics you have to work your way around. It also becomes harder to find all of those optional side waddle-dees in each level, and those side missions that I mentioned, the challenges focused on certain power-ups, they go from being quite easy to actually really quite difficult. Maybe they'll lock you into certain power-ups and then throw specific enemy types at you that are really good at countering that specific ability that you've been given, or maybe something like the platforming difficulty increases by quite a lot. There's also an extra set of levels that you can play once you've completed the main story. These are sort of a rehash of all the levels before, but with the difficulty increased and new mechanics thrown in again, and these levels are probably some of the most fun that I've had with this game. So I think talking about difficulty leads us quite nicely onto boss fights. And look, I had seen all of the jokes on the internet about Kirby games going from, very plain and easy to sort of Dark Souls level of difficulty, and I always really just thought that it was a joke. So you can imagine my surprise when I started to take on some of these endgame bosses. So the first few bosses that you fight, yeah, they are easy, especially if you're experienced at playing games. But by the end, the style and the difficulty of these bosses, it just is completely different to what you are fighting at the start. They have challenge to them, they have mechanics that you have to try and work out how to dodge or avoid or counter. They go from being something else that you kind of breeze through to something you have to actually think about how to fight, and it is just some of the most fun that I have in the game. There's often multiple things to dodge, attack patterns that you can learn, timings you can figure out. They are still beatable, mind, you know, they don't really compare to Dark Souls in terms of difficulty. You will still be able to beat them, but there have definitely been multiple times when I have beaten these bosses with just a slither of health left, and I've been kind of nervous as to whether I was going to do it or not. Partway through the game, you also unlock the Colosseum back in Waddle Dee Village. Now the first run of this is pretty easy, 6 bosses, quite simple, it's not too much of a challenge at all. But then after that, the second and third difficulties, it does get much harder. It's now double the length of gauntlet run that you have to do. There are some unique bosses as well, and it really is just a fun boss rush mode that you can take on that you only unlock later on in the game. Honestly, the way that the bosses are at the end of the game compared to how they are at the start of the game, the change is just insane. And I know this would never happen, but I kind of love the idea of HAL Labs at some point making a game where they can just go all out on difficulty and creativity and making something challenging. There are plenty of games where I don't necessarily enjoy fighting bosses that much, but I think Kirby and the Forgotten Land shows that HAL Labs do have a knack for it, especially these endgame bosses. So there we go, I started off playing Kirby and the Forgotten Land thinking that it was a little bit of a chore to get through, but by the end I was having such a great time, and I'm really glad that I revisited it. These days there are just so many games that I want to play, and that kind of means that I often leave a game when I get through the story. I don't often do, you know, extra content or anything additional. But with Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I've kept playing, doing the challenges so they can upgrade those abilities, beating those extra levels, and clearing the runs on the Colosseum, and I've been having a really good time doing it. I hope you liked this video. It was a little bit different from normal, more just me sort of talking about a few particular aspects of a game. I like to show new things every now and then on the channel, so let me know if you liked this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.